I'm Melanie Johnson along with my co-host Jen Foster. We are both 13-time best-selling authors. We've published over 2,500 books and made all of our authors #1 bestsellers. We own Elite Online Publishing. If you want to become a best-selling author, look us up at eliteonlinepublishing.com. Now, welcome to the podcast that shares secrets from top industry experts that show you how to get lasting success and results. This is the Elite Expert Insider Podcast. Hi, welcome everyone. It's Melanie Johnson and Jen Foster. How are you doing today? We are going to teach you how to identify your triggers, relieve stress, so you know what your triggers are and how to eliminate them. So I think this is very important because if you can figure that out, just think how much easier, calmer, more enjoyable, happy your life would be if you can identify those triggers and get rid of them. So before we dive deep into that, then I want you to make sure you subscribe and like our podcast. You can catch us on YouTube. You can catch us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, all of those places. And you want to get notifications when we have our podcast because it's always great, great content. So Naeem, tell us, thank you so much and welcome for coming
It's
to our
great to be
podcast
here
today.
Yeah, my name's Dr. Nima Ramani.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So we just want to start with kind of how you got into this, how you became a doctor, and how you're helping all these people. How did you start getting?
Well, I'm a chiropractor, and most of the time, if you've ever been to the chiropractor, you're going in because of a stress-related problem. There's an ache or a pain. Sometimes it's from falls and injuries and accidents, but most often they're chronic problems. And I kept seeing these patterns with my patients. And after you get to know them, you realize that their health issues are downstream from a stress-related problem. And if you keep going upstream in the stress-related problem, what do you think the stress-related problem usually is? It revolves around.
Is it depression? It's mental, really emotional a lot of times.
Yeah, of course, it's a stress-related problem, but why do those emotional issues happen? It's because of relationship breakdowns. You know, see, the thing is, when you say, oh, it's depression, it's mental, that's not the origin. Mental, depression, emotional, it's not the origin. It's because of events that happen in your life that you interpret and make meaning out of that create the mental, anxiety, emotional issues. These emotional issues do not happen like on their own. They happen because of the interpersonal relationship breakdowns that we have. And so without addressing the interpersonal breakdown and keeping on going upstream from that, you now realize that it comes down to a person with their relationship with themselves. So over a 20-year period, I just kept going upstream. And if you don't know who you are with context to this universe, what makes your heart sing, and you don't have a real idea of who it is that you are, you get into relationships for unconscious reasons, to fill a void rather than for a space to heal and evolve and grow together. And these breakdowns will happen, and you'll go from one relationship to another, or you'll find yourself getting into the exact same argument again and again and again. And this is what causes health breakdowns. And so what I discovered was that I just really wanted to teach people the root cause of why they came in the first place. I started with a 3-hour Saturday morning workshop called Life Skills for a Stressful World for my patients. And I discovered that those who came to those workshops and learned the tools, they had better outcomes in their health. And fast forward about 10 years, that 3-hour Saturday morning event became Saturday morning workshop became a 3-day live event where I teach you how to heal where I teach people how the tools to heal their past traumas, heal their relationships, emotionally regulate, connect to purpose, to deepen intimacy in their lives, because that's the root cause of their stress. And when you teach them those tools, all of a sudden they become the author of their own lives. They become the hero of their own journey. They become self-healers. And so now I lead a global community of self-healers, teaching how to resolve your own stresses and anxieties so that you can show up more secure in your relationships and not be so codependent and not fall into the exact same patterns, relationship breakup after breakup with the exact same person again and again. These come from old childhood, incomplete childhood woundings.
Yeah.
So I help people heal their emotional wounds that are tied into their physical ones.
So a lot of times they say, you've broken up in that relationship, but you're taking yourself into the next one, right? If you don't
100%.
fix yourself.
Mhm.
And then you made a good point I love about it. It's the, you have this broken relationship. And a lot of times I think what you're saying too, is the story you tell yourself.
Mhm.
So someone may do something or like make a comment like after this or during this interview, I could be like, oh, and you'd be like, oh, I wonder if maybe she doesn't like what I'm saying or she's not connecting with what I'm saying. You start immediately telling yourself this story that
Mhm.
has to do with you internally,
Yeah.
right? But it might have had nothing to do with you. It might have been like, I just, stubbed my toe under the table while I was sitting here or something like that. I'd like you to walk us through, you mentioned these tools of the seminars that you do, which sound fabulous, by the way. Really give us a sample of a few of those tools that are really strategic and making a shift in people's lives in a couple of those categories.
Well, you just said it right there. Somebody does something in front of you and all of a sudden you make up a story. The question is, where do those stories come from? And the answer is old unresolved trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we go through life, because we rely on our parents, our caregivers, in order to survive, in moments when big feelings have come up and our parents don't have the tools to really attune to their children, they don't understand, they're bringing their traumas into the whole situation. You have a big feeling and then you're kind of silenced, or your mother or father withdraws from you when you have an emotion. You then learn and are conditioned that your authentic expression, even just mentioning, something and you're shamed for it, your authentic expression is invalid.
Yeah.
Is not appropriate. So we are conditioned from a young age to suppress our authentic expression in order to for the sake, in service of survival. It's like either our authenticity or attachment, and we're going to choose attachment every time. So we are now conditioned to abandon ourselves and betray ourselves. And every single time throughout our childhood, even before we had language, before we had cognition, we had to become a specific character in order to get approval.
Okay,
right?
so how do we stop that story?
Yeah,
So
I'm actually explaining it to you.
Okay, you're getting to there. Okay.
I'm getting to it.
Okay.
So what happens is when that happens, we then are conditioned to abandon ourselves. So then we start hitting our teenage years and somebody says something about us in school and we feel that removal of approval. It's boom, that old trauma comes back up. So we get triggered from those old traumas. It could be capital T trauma, physical or emotional abuse, or small t, which is when a parent is completely narcissistic in their own head, going through their own problems, they don't have the ability to really see and validate their own children, or they use their children as a tool for kind of like, I gotta, for performance, for their own needs because of their own, their own traumas, their own inadequacies. So what that does is that it just passes the trauma down to the next generation. And then we are raised in environments where we don't feel worthy of love just for our beingness. We have to put on a performance, we have to put on a mask, and we lose ourselves. And what happens is throughout our lives, those triggers, those emotional wounds, they're not just cognitive, they're not just stories in our minds, they're actually in our bodies. There's an unsafe feeling that's in our bodies, and they're emotional wounds. And so we walk through the earth, and you go to school, or you get fired from work, or somebody raises their voice a little bit. Let's say you had a father who, was abusive. He raises his voice just a little bit, and all of a sudden your body will go into this fight or flight or freeze. Well, what is that? Well, that's trauma that's stuck in your body. So what we do, this is not an easy process. The first step to realize is that your triggers are information. Your triggers are if you all of a sudden see somebody roll their eyes at you and you lose shit over it. What that is your body is letting you know that there's an old unresolved wounding. And so the first step that your ideal is to stretch the gap between stimulus and response. And this takes practice. It takes awareness. It takes an observation of the stories that you're making, and you're going to pause and go into breath. What I teach my clients, you just pause, you go right into breath, and you recognize the first step is awareness. The trigger is just a little mini panic attack that you're having, that your body is letting you know you're unsafe because of an old background anxiety that hasn't been resolved yet. So the first step is to realize this is an awareness. This is an awareness that nothing that I'm going through right now is about what it's about. The coronavirus thing, it had nothing to do with the coronavirus. It had to do with, being locked in your room when you were, 15 years old or 8 years old. You know what I mean? It's what we're here to do, what my message is to learn the tools of being able to take those triggers and then go back and connect with the feelings of the younger parts of us and feel them and go back and reparent and reconnect with those parts of us that we abandoned long time ago, because we've abandoned many parts of us in service of approval. Oh, and your healing work is the climbing the mountain of reintegrating every part of your younger parts that you have abandoned. And that's how you become trigger proof. You can't become trigger less. You can never get rid of them, because they are information. And the first thing you want to do is to change your relationship with them. It's not something you want to get rid of. It's something you want to observe and use as information. The biggest challenge is the moment you're triggered, you get unconscious and go into your emotional child brain, so you're not thinking straight. But the practice is to be able to identify it and go into breath and self-regulate, so that then you can change your thoughts about it.
Right. It's kind of like a defense mechanism automatically programmed into us, right?
100%. It is
So
a
I think I
defense
like
mechanism.
that you said that it's not going to go away. You can't be proof less, but you can be proof. Say the words again that you said.
Trigger
Trigger
proof
proof,
does
not trigger
not
less.
mean
Okay.
does not mean trigger less. I get triggered. I was triggered just before this call, and I would, like 10 minutes before this call, I had an email from there was a business associate that didn't feel great 10 minutes before this call, and I'm like, oh shit, now I gotta get on this call and not and be out of my mind.
Yeah.
Right. And so be in my head rather than be present. So I took a few moments, and I have it's kind of an active meditation process that I teach that gets you connected with your breath and body and the wounded inner child and the adaptive adolescent, and self-soothes and self-regulates with internal co-regulation with that younger part of you. And then you can now show up and not be impacted by your stories from the past.
I think that's a really good question to ask. Like you say, when something happens or triggers you, it can filter. If they don't know your techniques, it triggers down to you're triggered, right? Then that filters to you're in this uneasy mindset. That filters to the reaction to your kids if they ask you for something that was like a normal question. You're like, what do you want? And then then they're in a bad mood, and then they're kicking the dog, or so to speak, it trickles down. So one trigger can lead to giving a variety of people a bad day, so to speak.
Well, exactly. Well, I was on an interview, and it's kind of like this. It's like, let's say you're 3 years old, and you accidentally spill the water on the floor, and all of a sudden your parent wasn't in a good place, turns around and says, "Why did you do that?" Immediately, as a 3-year-old, you get a trauma response because you're confused, right? And immediately the sensations in your body go up, and they're so uncomfortable that you're sent to your brain, and then you make a meaning out of it. And what ends up happening, guess what the meaning is that you make out of that?
Usually negative.
I'm a bad person. I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of love. So then here's what happened. And I was telling him this story, and then he said, oh my gosh, like I did that with my daughter. Like I feel incredibly guilty. Like, what do I do? And I said, well, here's what you do. Because I was talking about intergenerational trauma. And then I said, okay, so check this out. The moment where your daughter spilled the drink on the floor, in that moment, as it came up, what was the story you made up about her dropping the drink? And he stopped and he was like, I said, because what happens is when you get triggered, you make it about you. You're making it about you.
Yeah.
Right. And he said, I guess she just spilled the milk. I made it mean that I'm a bad parent, or I'm not worthy. And I'm like, where did you get that idea? And then he's like, from my father. And I'm like, can you see how you're literally passing it down to your child? And this unresolved becomes passed down from one generation to another. And this is why we have intergenerational trauma. And I believe it's leading to a society of covert narcissism, like covert, because we now are so disconnected from our younger parts, because we are so because of the trauma, we now walk around with masks on, projecting externally, wanting external validation. And then when we're in that space, we completely are unable to empathize with the people that are right there in front of us. And then we become narcissistic parents, and then to children that we raise narcissistic children. And it just, because they don't have the experience of feeling seen and heard. And you can stop the cycle by stopping saying, I'm going to do my own healing work. Instead of trying to take my kids to the doctors for their issues, I'm proposing people say, look, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to heal the wounded parts of myself. So that's the work.
I love that. So it's really the awareness, like you talked about before, having that awareness that it's happening and taking that minute, breathing, and then going further and learning from you, or learning from someone who can help you to stop the cycle of making
the first step is the awareness. This is the most difficult part, because people are like, very ashamed of it. There's a lot of shame going on, and shame is the biggest proponent of creating, our narcissistic ways, because we're not willing to embrace our shame. We hide it because we feel like we're the only ones, and because of that we suppress it, and we put on these masks. And it's very obvious. I can feel it in people now. After I've done the work, you develop you develop this third dimension of being able to feel people. You really, once you've done the work, you're able to empathize with yourself. You now are able to feel people. You can, you just by their voices, just by their eye contact, their facial expressions, you can see where they're wearing a mask. And most of society, actually, I would say most people, when we go out, and because we're hiding some sort of a shame, and it's all unresolved trauma, and we all have it. And the thing is, when you put your hand up and you say, I'm going to do the healing work, magical things start to happen in your life. You start to feel less anxiety in your body. You start to feel like you're able to emotionally regulate. You then feel like, oh my gosh, this isn't just an empty existence. I actually feel connected to myself and the world around me. And this resistance to getting my business going, resistance to getting my relationships feeling more nourishing, all of a sudden I'm able to move through that resistance, because I've now resolved and regulated the trauma in my nervous system. And that's the most important thing. I teach people how to self-heal.
Yeah, I think the result of all that is that you learn to treat yourself better with your tools and techniques. You treat yourself better, and then in turn, you treat other people better.
100%. Exactly.
And then in general, your whole life gets better when that happens.
Everything. The biggest transformation you notice that's palpable is your health. I had a client who's been dealing, she was divorced 8 years ago, abusive marriage, 2 kids, and she's just been struggling. And she has this thing ever since childhood, because of all her childhood traumas, where she's constantly picking at her skin. Okay. She's just constantly it's like a form of self-harm. It's an anxious kind of a tick type of thing. And over the last 3 months, we've been working together, and we've cleared so much of her past trauma. She's no longer feels a victim to her history anymore. She messaged me yesterday and she says, my anxiety levels are so much lower, and I've stopped picking at my skin for the first time since I was 11. And she's like in her
Wow.
30s. And
Wow.
she basically said the biggest miracle is my kids are not as anxious.
Mhm.
And it's weird because the greatest gift that a mother can give her child is a regulated, self-loving mother.
Mhm.
Because when a mother isn't that way, she unconsciously acts in so many compensatory ways that
Mhm.
create more. It's like a control mechanism that you see. It's an unconscious need for control
Yes.
that comes from her own traumas, her own
Mhm.
inadequacies. And the greatest gift, and then she'll end up passing it down to children who don't feel seen and heard because they've just been tried to controlled, and they don't feel, loved for who they are.
Right.
And so this is a very powerful revelation that I made. And, I have a baby on the way in October. And so I realized that, everything that this baby is going through right now is being downloaded into its unconscious mind. Your first traumas happened when you were in utero. All
Mhm.
of if your mother didn't feel that she was safe with the relationship, and that anxiety that she was feeling, guess what, that gets downloaded down to you.
Mhm.
So now I have the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing has now become much bigger than just myself. I'm now responsible for this child, my wife, and I want to. My vision is to create a community of people who are self healers,
Mhm. I
to
love
break
that.
that cycle of trauma.
Yeah. So you do trainings for others who want to learn how to do this?
100%. Yeah, I do virtual trainings. It's called the Overview Experience, and
Mhm.
we do somatic work. So we work with removing trauma from the body through breath work and inner child meditation, with cognitive tools that
Mhm.
help you shift the story after you've removed the alarm from the body. So it's all kind of integrated, all with the goal of regulating your nervous system.
Yeah. Awesome.
Perfect.
I love that. You're helping so many people.
Yeah. But tell us where we can
That's
find
great.
you.
There is my website, and the best place is to actually go on my Facebook group. It's called Trigger Proof. The Facebook group it's just called Trigger Proof: How to Regulate Stress and Strengthen Immunity During a Global Crisis. So you jump in there, and I do trainings pretty much every single day. And I teach people how to get into their bodies and into their breath, and how to remove toxicity from their relationships. I like to focus on relationships, like kids, parents, partnerships, business relationships, because our relationships reveal where our unconscious triggers are, that you don't know that they're there until you're in a relationship with someone and they kind of trigger you. So
Right.
Current and past relationship. Well, thank you so much for being on
Yeah.
the show. We really appreciate it.
thanks for
Yeah.
having
So
me.
we will put your Trigger Proof Facebook group URL in the show notes, as well as your website, drnima.com.
And
So
I'd
we'll make
love
sure
to
we
give
have
a
that.
gift. If you're listening and you really want the training, I have a 90-minute training on how to become trigger proof, like the steps that you need to do.
Mhm.
And I'm just going to leave leave that link there. drnima.com/VW1. If you put the promo code in, it says trigger proof, all one word, in
Lowercase.
small letters,
Mhm.
lowercase, then you get it for free. And it's my gift.
Great. We'll
That's
put that link in
wonderful.
the show notes as well as in the descriptions here. So
You bet.
drnima.com/VW1. That's V as in Victor,
Mm-hmm.
W1. Awesome.
/ Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Terrific. Well, thanks. We had another great show for you today. We really appreciate it. Remember to subscribe and like the podcast and share it with other people. And we'll see you next time.
Bye. Make it a great day.
Hey, are you looking to increase your revenue, build credibility, and elevate your brand? This podcast is brought to you by Elite Online Publishing, an innovative publishing and full spectrum marketing company. They will publish and market your book to make it a #1 bestseller. Becoming an author is the best way to market your business. So contact them at eliteonlinepublishing.com today. All of their authors become #1 bestsellers.